Okay, this is a video about terminal value in project finance. Now, I don't know why you watch videos or anything else, but when I make them, a lot of times it's after a class. And I know somebody, that man said, I'm a student, not a teacher. I am a student, okay? And if you're not interested, fine. Okay, I don't know what this business of rating videos is and all this. This is primarily made for somebody in my class, and I didn't get a chance to really go through terminal value. Now, some of the issues I'm going to talk about are how we should, the main issue is how should we account for the terminal value? If we're making a bid, in this case electricity, but it could be anything, how should we our bid affected by the value at the end of the contract? In this case, a long-term contract. The second issue is whether terminal value is actually really a big deal, or is it just some minor little thing that just is so lost in the rounding that it hardly matters at all. And third is, what kind of assumption should we make about the terminal value? I'm sorry, I'm reading PowerPoint slides. Ooh, God. Okay, now, here's some key themes that I'm going to emphasize throughout this thing, and I'm going to try to keep it short. Because my friend Elena met me in Malaysia. She flew all the way from Singapore, and she said she fell asleep during my videos, that they were too long, and her mother saw her sleeping at the computer while she was trying to follow along, and had to wake her up and said, "What are you doing?" Okay, sorry if you fall asleep. Now, if you overstate the IRR or use a too high target IRR or don't recognize how low cost of capital is really in the economy today, you're gonna kind of have a lower effect on the terminal value than it really is. And secondly, I know people argue. I can imagine people getting in big arguments about the terminal value. And then some manager saying, excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. Oh no. Okay, maybe I didn't sneeze. Oh no. Okay, whatever. And then they might say, oh no, terminal value, it's speculative. It might be zero. It might be negative. Don't include it. Don't include it. And then you say, oh, we're going to be conservative and not conclude it. We're going to be conservative. What the heck does that mean? Doesn't mean anything at all. You should do what's correct. And just leaving out something because somebody said, oh, we don't know what it's going to be. What an absurd thing to do. Putting in a zero it's again like my example of putting an oil price in at zero because you don't know what it's going to be. Okay, maybe it could be negative. Now, the last thing, and I'm going to probably have this in a second video, and this is really where it gets a little bit more interesting. When you have a contract, everything's locked in. You're committed. I wonder what kind of contracts you could think about. You're committed. You can't do anything. Now, when the contract is finished, some of the contracts I'm thinking about might not be finished very easily. When the contract is finished, you're flexible. You can do different things. You can do different strategies. You can either abandon the plant, refurbish it, keep it going as is, or let it deteriorate, which might be by far the best thing to do. Just let them kind of fall apart. But make a little money while you're letting it fall apart. There are different things to do, and those different things to do depend on what the spot price is. And so if we don't take account of different real options, those are real options, when we think about terminal value, we'll make a mistake. So I'm going to look at IRRs and terminal values, and then I'm going to put IRRs with and without refinancing, and that should take up maybe part one of the video. Maybe I'll do a little bit of the next one, and then we'll have a whole discussion of real options, and then finally kind of some different ways to look at risks and IRRs and all that stuff. Okay, and so let's talk about the IRR and just the mathematics of IRRs. And here's the mathematics. If the IRR is really high, it looks like the terminal value is worth nothing. If the IRR is low, it looks like it's worth a lot. And that's because of the mathematics of IRR. IRR is the number that makes the NPV equal 0, or it's the growth rate in the cash flows. That's a better way to describe it. But if you think about it as the NPV that makes the net present value 0, or the growth rate in cash flows where we compound it at the IRR itself, then when you're discounting something at 20%, something in year 20 is worth just about 0, 0, 0. And here's our example. So now I'm going to go through some Excel. Okay, and on the Excel, come on, I've got a few little examples. And our first little example says, okay, I'm going to redo a little bit of this. Okay, just so you get used to it. Okay, we have a CapEx, and then we have a recovery of our capital. And I said, okay, let's go to 21 years. I just pressed Shift Control R. And I said our terminal value is 100% of our whatever, our 100% of our CapEx. And I put that out in the last period. Control right arrow. There you go. It's just a kind of stupid little calculation. And so at the cash flow at the end, we have a little bit of extra terminal value. And then we compute the IRR. Lazy. And then we make a data table. Okay? If you, Shift Control. And then if you go Alt DT, whoops, oh no, Alt DT, and then the column input, let's put the column input as this little thing here, and then the row input as the terminal percent, and then we get our kind of data table, and here's what it shows, is that when, just a minute, okay, after all these years of making data tables, I still get it wrong. If we move from 100%, 0 to 100%, our IRR goes from nothing to 5% if we really have a low capital recovery. If we go down and have a really high capital recovery, we go from 28.88% to 32% if we increase the terminal value all the way from 0 to 20. If this doesn't kind of prove to you that when we have a low number, a low IRR, terminal value can be more important. When we have a high IRR, it's less important, period. Now, if you try to make a graph of this, it doesn't work because of this stupid thing in the middle, these data tables. So you have to copy this. I copied this down to here. I pasted special. I just pasted it, I guess. And now you make a graph. So that's how part of this video is how stupid data tables are. And then you can see here that, when we have a really low thing, the terminal value really matters a lot. When you have a high, it doesn't matter whatsoever, okay? And I put that graph here, and then I put it in my PowerPoint slide. So that's our first little example. And here's the big implication already for Africa. It looks like people want 20% IRRs, those criminals. Sorry I said that. But they're just making the economies never grow in Africa when they do that. And it's so high, then the terminal value seems like it's not important. But that's a distortion because the IRR is so high. And everything we're doing, everything I'm talking about affects the kind of long-term. If we have a long-term contract versus a short-term contract, or we want to make a longer contract, it seems to not be valuable if you have a really high IRR. Now let's go to the next one. Let's say instead we want to, instead of doing our IRR, I want to put a target IRR in here. Oh, where's my target IRR? I want to put 10% IRR. And then I can make a goal seek, Alt D, whatever. Let's just go to data. Sorry, it's not a really funny thing, is it? Goal seek, let's set the net present value at the target IRR by changing our capital recovery rate. And then, of course, I tell people that I remember. That's like one of the big days of my life when I made my first macro in 1990 sometime, early maybe. And then so whenever you make the goal seek macro, I hope you almost always say, I should be making a macro around it. So we, of course, make our goal seek macro, and then we do the same thing. Okay, what if analysis, goal seek. You don't have to really make I shouldn't do that again. Okay, now once we have our goal seek macro, then the problem is a data table won't work, will it? So you have to use a little bit of a macro. And when you use a macro, use the for and the next. For, next, and cells. For, next, and cells. And we want to make this data table so it works in any sheet. So we basically can copy it to the next sheet, make a new data table. So step one is let's make a range name for a bunch of stuff. Shift Control F3. And it says use the left column. So we're going to make a thing, and it says the row start. That's our row start. The row end, it's just off the screen. Column start, column end. And then I made a terminal, where's our terminal percent? Okay, that's a range name here. Control F3. Shift Control F3, Control F3, F3. They're all range name stuff. And then if we want to make so now what we'll have to do is put in this for the terminal value. So we'll put in this. We'll put in the target IRR to be, we'll copy and paste the 4%. So we'll press the target IRR to 4%. So that's the target IRR range name. And then our output is this thing, the capital recovery. This one right here, it says capital recovery. And then we'll make a goal seek. Now I'll just run it first and then show you the macro. This macro, I have a whole stuff on this macros. There's a whole thing on how to do these, but it just is doing the goal seek each time and giving us how much price we have to charge at different IRRs. And when we have a really low IRR, if I take the difference between this one and the first one and put -1, I think that's what I did, and then I put it for all of them. Notice no thing in the middle. And this data table, here's the way it works. We'll assign the macro and press edit. And what you do, first we made a goal seek, and in the goal seek I put the names. And then I go from the row start to the row end. Everything's got to be range named for column start to column end. And then I said, well, let's even figure out what these names of ranges are. It's kind of like double range names. Now, I did this because I thought, okay, let's say the range for the row input, this range name now, and that's down here, this range for row input. So that's going to be terminal percentage. Terminal percent. That is, we put range there and they say column start -1, and then column, a row start -1, and do the same thing for the target IRR. Then you do your goal seek up here, run, and then you say the cells output for the row and the column are this output, and that's our output name. So all we have to do is we can put this in any sheet now. All we have to do is put a row and a column in, and it'll be very flexible, and it'll work, and it'll do a goal seek. I guess we'd have to figure out what goal seek we really want to use. We might have to change it around a bit. And that's what this does. And the key implication of that, again, is that we have a very high number at 0 and a very, when we have a low IRR, we have a very big effect on the bid. And when we have a high IRR, no effect on the bid. Okay, that's what I put here. All right, so if you bid high IRRs, you're probably going to lose. 2 reasons, just because the IRR itself, and also because the terminal value will be kind of understated if we believe there's a terminal value. And here's a little copy of our code. But now let's put both financing and refinancing in. And if financing is there, I'm not sure. So far, this could have been the project IRR or the equity IRR. We didn't really say it's the same. And it's pre-tax, or I didn't put taxes in. What happens if we lower the project IRR because we have financing? Then if we lower the IRR, is it going to be like one of these things where it's down here just because we put financing in or not? I'm not sure. And then what if we put refinancing in? That's the real question. And I've heard a lot of this stuff. I've heard that banks people push the banks so hard they get them to kind of put the terminal value in the sculpting. They get them to even kind of include terminal value as that bullet repayment at the end. Now, okay, and here's refinancing. I'm reading this, okay. I'm going to skip that. And then we're going to instead of making this really simple model we made, we'll move to a more complicated model. Not gigantically more complicated, but we'll just do a couple of things. This time we put the CapEx, the capital recovery, just like last time. I can put a 10% IRR in and a 50% terminal value, and it's going to give me, I'm going to do goal seek, and it's going to give me the carrying charge rate, just like we did before, except this time I put some debt to capital, how long the debt is, and this is the next one is capital expenditure. That's just like what we did before, no difference. When we go all the way to the end, we have a terminal value, and we did a little flexible with all our little true-false switches in our beautiful colors and all that stuff. And then I put then I said, okay, I want sculpting. Oh, the DSCR is below 1. Shh. Okay, and when I put sculpting in, okay, I'll put a 10-year debt, so it's a little bit bigger. To make the sculpting work with this approach, oh shoot, I've got to put 20 maybe. To make the sculpting work with this approach, I said, okay, what's the present value of the CFADS over the debt tenor? Okay, did I do that wrong? Just a minute. This is the and the debt repay. Oh, this debt repayment switch now goes to 20. That's why it looks long. And then I said, let's take the CFADS, divide it by the LLCR, and to get the LLCR or PLCR, DSCR, because it's all the same, you take the total debt of 750, 75%, and divide it by the PV of the CFADS over the debt term at the interest rate, divide it by that. I've got about 20 videos on that, so I'm going to shut up about it. And then we make our debt balance go down to 0, and it goes down. Oh, this one I had a refinancing, and let me take the refinancing out. So I'm going to put the refinancing in year 60. That means we never refinance. Okay, and then we pay off our debt, and the closing balance eventually goes to 0, as it normally should. And then I put an option for refinancing the debt, and when we refinance the debt, this doesn't have it in yet, then we pay off the initial debt, if there's any left, and we figure out what the DSCR is on our refinancing. So now if I press the goal seek, I figure out what the carrying charge is. And then I made a second data table, and it was really easy to do. I swear it was easy to do. You basically had to copy the first one, make a new goal seek for this goal seek I showed you here, and then you can just run the data table, and it's going to do this bid pricing. And then when I did it in this scenario, it changed things a little, and maybe, I suppose this is doubling kind of the effect, but it's still a small effect, so it didn't affect that much. But if I put the debt term and I make the debt tenor go all the way out to so it covers just a minute, I thought, well, I thought if I put the debt tenor to make it cover the terminal value, I thought it was a bigger effect. Now let's put, well, I'm sorry, let's put a 7-year refinancing in. And then when I put a 7-year refinancing in, suddenly everything is really increased dramatically. And I'm just doing the same sort of goal seek, but this time, for instance, at 8%. We started with 23% effect. Now it's much more, and that's because I put a zero tail. If I make a little tail here, I'm going to explain what I do with a tail, then you're back to a smaller effect. But if you make the tail cover the refinancing, then the terminal value effect is much, much, much larger. And let me explain the refinancing. So I put a refinancing year, I put a DSCR. I think I'm getting into a new philosophy. Now, if it comes from the red sheet, that means I put little spinner boxes around this so we can redo our table with all the little spinner boxes and everything else. And I put a little tiny bit lower interest rate, and I put this in. So we put a little true and false switch when we do our refinancing. And then we put a repayment switch for our refinancing, and if there's zero tail, it covers our CFADS in that last year. It covers the terminal value. It covers the terminal value. I have to say it 3 times. And now if it covers the terminal value, that means when I put the PV of the debt service in here, this is just the total cash flow divided by 1.2, which is our assumed DSCR. Then I get a higher amount of debt. And when I get a higher amount of debt, I issue this debt in this year, and we go down and we pay ourselves a really big dividend. Oh, it's so big it doesn't even show up there. I'm not going to make it even wider to do it. And then we redo our whole thing with that refinancing. And the refinancing essentially lowers it's like lowering the discount rate, I think, in the terminal year. It's kind of like that. And when we do that, it has a big effect. I guess if I put the refinancing earlier, it has even bigger effect. So if we can refinance and get some financing of that terminal value, suddenly these really small effects start to show up to be a really big effect. That's the theme here. And I've been saying this now in various different contexts. I think I started a while ago. Now I've been kind of more emotional about it. But not assuming refinancing is like, again, assuming an oil price of 0. We don't know exactly what it's going to be, but we know that the refinancing makes a big difference to the terminal value. All right, so now here's what this is, the end of part 1. And in part 2, I'm going to move to how we estimate the value of how we estimate how much the value of the terminal value should be. I said value too much, excuse me for that. And that's only 23 minutes for going through that. I don't think it was that long. I hope, Elena, if you're watching this, I hope you stayed away.